Hey there, and welcome to my channel. I'm Ashley Willingham, a sinner saved by grace, and an author of clean Christian fantasy romance books filled with adult characters, action, adventure, on-page prayer, and God's truths. You're listening to the free serialized audiobook for Ink and Ivy, my cozy Christian fantasy romance, Book One in the Gracehaven series. Don't forget to like and subscribe. God bless and enjoy.
Chapter 46. The canopy of ancient oaks cast the forest in cool, emerald shade. The drifting motes of light danced in the late spring breeze like glowing embers. All around, the air hung sweet with the rich, earthy scent of moss and blooming honeysuckle. A trickle of birdsong winged through the branches overhead. A few yards away, Elodie's bright laughter pierced the quiet hum of the woods, joining the birds' song. The girl was a blur of boundless energy as she flitted through the trees. Just ahead of her outstretched fingertips, a pixie, hardly larger than a hummingbird and glowing with a brilliant pearlescent light, darted between the trunks, leading her on a merry chase.
"Elodie,"
Mr. Vail's voice rang out.
"do not go too far."
Sitting near the edge of the picnic blanket, Ivy dragged her hands down the familiar fabric of her sage-green dress, smoothing out non-existent wrinkles. Over and over again. A flush of self-conscious warmth painted her cheeks. Her fingers twitched, desperate to reach up and pull free the delicate blossoms she had painstakingly woven through the tumble of her hair just that morning. Soft peach roses and star-shaped jasmine. When last she had adorned her hair in such a way, it had been from a desire to vex Mr. Vail. But today, back within the comfort of her bedroom, she had thought they made her look rather pretty. A touch more vibrant. Out here in the forest, sitting on a blanket across from Mr. Vail, with his smart green coat and a bronze waistcoat to match, his own hair swept back in those flawless braids of his, she just felt silly. Like a little girl playing dress-up. Especially when his gaze snagged on her hair again for the 5th time in so many minutes. Did he like it? Did he hate it? Did it matter? From the corner of her eye, she watched him quietly unpack the wicker basket Mrs. Creedy had prepared for them, setting out a spread that felt far too elegant for a simple afternoon resting on the forest floor. He arranged a platter of roasted spring chicken beside a bundle of tender asparagus spears. A selection of various cheeses, ranging from hard cheddar to herbaceous goat cheese, and a crusty loaf of bread soon followed. But it was the small cloth-wrapped tin he unsealed last that sent a rich, intoxicatingly familiar scent wafting through the damp forest air, crumbly chocolate cookies with ribbons of yet more chocolate woven throughout. As if somehow Mrs. Creedy had known how much she had been craving more of Fern's chocolate pastries of late. Mortifyingly, her stomach chose that exact moment to rumble. But of course it would. The cookies smelled delicious, and she had been too nervous to eat breakfast that morning. Mr. Vail paused, his attention drifting from the tin to snag on the jasmine blossoms in her hair once again. Ivy's pulse gave a frantic flutter. She quickly glanced away, fixing her full attention on the sight of Elodie frolicking with her new pixie friend. Forcing a light note into her voice, she observed, "It seems as though she's already forgotten all about the purpose of our coming out here." When she dared to hazard another glance his way, it was to find his features arranged in their familiar, unreadable mask as he held out a cloth napkin for her to take. Resting directly in the centre, one of those delicious-smelling chocolate cookies.
"I do not mind,"
he murmured, the sudden velveteen quality of his voice sending her heart stuttering. She reached out to accept his offering, but her trembling fingers nearly knocked the cookie straight out of his hand. With a panicked scramble, she managed to catch it in the palm of her own before it could tumble into her lap. A peal of nervous laughter bubbled from her throat. "Thank you!" she expelled, immediately pinning her attention back on Elodie, thoroughly mortified for the 2nd time this afternoon. And their picnic had only just begun. She would never survive the outing. The gentle clink of silverware striking against plates sounded as he went back to unpacking the basket, continuing as if nothing at all had just occurred. For a blissful moment, she thought she had managed to escape his scrutiny. But then that moment passed.
You're quiet.
He observed, flicking her another glance. She swallowed hard, her own gaze dutifully tracking Elodie and the pixie through the trees, ensuring the girl didn't stray too far. "Am I?" he hummed.
Indeed. What are you thinking about?
"You." The word burned on her tongue. She bit down hard on the inside of her cheek, swallowing back the fresh burst of nervous laughter threatening to spill from her lips. Desperate for a distraction, she abruptly lifted the cookie and took a generous bite. It was an absolute revelation. Decadent dark chocolate melted instantly against her tongue, yielding to a buttery, crumbly centre that seemed to dissolve the moment she tasted it. A perfect, startling crunch of coarse sea salt rested atop, slicing beautifully through the sweetness. Goodness, Mrs. Creedy was an excellent baker. She chewed slowly, endeavouring to savour the treat. But the weight of Mr. Vail's stare remained, a palpable pressure against the side of her face. Shifting her weight upon the blanket, she finally surrendered to the question that had been clawing at the edges of her mind since her visit to his shop on Thursday afternoon. Lowering her half-eaten cookie, she turned her head to meet his gaze directly, her eyes locking with his. "You are no longer the Duke of Guildenspire?"
So you were reading Madame Clarion,
he whispered.
and not my shopping list. Shocking. Truly shocking.
His expression remained completely deadpan, his tone exceptionally dry. A fresh wave of heat flooded her cheeks. Raising her chin, she immediately fired back. "I was simply surprised to find that a gentleman would subscribe to such a broadsheet." The faintest twitch disturbed the corner of his lips.
Oh, I don't.
He quietly revealed in the midst of serving himself a cookie.
But Lucien is quite taken with them. He sends me a copy every week.
Ivy blinked. Lord Lucien Montclair? Truly? She tried to picture it. The elegant, silver-haired high elf she had met at Daphne's party. A man of impossible grace and refinement, greedily poring over gossip papers every week before sending them all the way across Luminara to share with his equally graceful and refined friend. The sheer absurdity of the mental image snapped the tight coil of tension in her chest. A genuine laugh escaped her lips, scattering through the emerald canopy.
Yes.
Mr. Vail continued, his gaze softening a touch in the wake of her laughter.
They amuse him greatly. He is always hopeful he will warrant a mention.
"And is he often mentioned?" she asked, a lingering smile curving her mouth.
No, aside from a brief reminder to the ton every season that he has yet to take a wife.
He huffed out a breath, the sound vaguely amused.
Lucien is far too agreeable to be a subject of gossip and scandal.
Silence descended between them once more, though this quiet felt vastly different from the stifling tension of earlier. It was companionable, comfortable. In the near distance, Elodie's bright laughter winged through the trees, intertwining with the rustle of the wind through the oak leaves.
Do you find this disappointing?
His sudden question broke the stillness. Ivy shot him a startled glance. Mr. Vail kept his attention fixed on Elodie now, his gaze no longer meeting hers.
My no longer being a duke, I mean.
The sheer vulnerability of the inquiry caught her completely off guard. "No," she answered at once, the word tumbling out a little too loudly in the hushed forest. She quickly cleared her throat and tried again, softening her tone. "No. I'm just curious as to... why?" A heavy sigh expanded his chest. He turned his head, his pale eyes continuing to track his daughter's erratic path through the distant brush. While he was thoroughly distracted, Ivy allowed her gaze to trace the arresting lines of his profile. The strong jut of his jaw, the aristocratic slope of his nose. The drifting motes of silver and gold light caught against the dark strands of his braided hair, making him gleam like some heroic prince out of a fairy tale.
I wish I could say it was for wholly selfless reasons,
he finally murmured, the admission carrying a weary weight.
That all I have done up to this point was simply for Elodie's sake. And in part, it has been.
He paused, the muscle in his jaw working.
She is different. though surely you have noticed that for yourself. Whether we were spending our summers at the estate in Guildenspire, or our winters and springs amidst the ton in Veritas, she was constantly judged by my peers. She was always being told she was too loud, too energetic, too much.
A profound ache cracked open in Ivy's chest for sweet Elodie. She glanced toward the trees just in time to see the girl lunge forward, her small hands cupping gently around the glowing pixie. "I got you!" Elodie happily exclaimed, her voice a triumphant bell ringing through the woods. Ivy smiled, a smile that withered instantly when Mr. Vael abruptly murmured,
"You see, my wife could not stand to be in the same room as me, Miss Fairwood."
For a moment, his words didn't make sense. She had almost forgotten that he was a widower, given that he never talked about his wife. And now she was starting to understand why. Returning her attention to him, she could only stare, her pulse halting mid-beat. But he was not looking at her. His gaze was firmly averted, fixed upon the mossy roots of a distant tree.
"It was an arranged marriage,"
he matter-of-factly informed her, his tone so detached he might have been recounting the history of a stranger rather than the intimate tragedy of his own life.
"I thought there was some affection there, of course, during our courtship, but I was mistaken. All Sylvie had ever truly wanted was to be the Duchess of Guildenspire, and I gave her that."
He swallowed visibly, the motion sharp against his throat. When he spoke again, the hollow detachment cracked, replaced by a raw, rasping ferocity.
"I do not want that sort of life for my Elodie, Miss Fairwood. I refuse to allow my world to try to force her to fit within a box entirely too small to hold her brilliance. And I will not have her expected to marry a man for mere politics, a man who only sees her title rather than who she truly is."
He finally turned his head and met her gaze head-on. A vivid thread of heat slipped past his composed mask, burning brightly within his ice-blue eyes. Love. He clearly loved his daughter so dearly it made her heart ache all over again.
"God loves us all for who we are,"
he whispered, his tone fierce, certain.
"not who the world thinks we should be. He loves us despite our faults and our myriad shortcomings. He sent his Son to die for us all, though we are sinners. He wants only good for us, even though—"
He abruptly trailed off, his jaw snapping shut, as if he had only just remembered himself. But his words had already struck a resounding chord deep within her soul. It was as if he had been sitting quietly beside her that very morning, reading over her shoulder as she sat at her desk with her morning devotional, reading Ephesians 2. But because of his great love for us, God, who is rich in mercy, made us alive with Christ, even when we were dead in transgressions. How many times had she whispered her own deepest fears into the dark, that her very existence made her a burden on those she loved? How often had she wished for a place of her very own simply so she could take up as little of other people's space as possible? A place where she could tuck herself away and finally put down permanent roots without being a nuisance. How often had she told herself that she was entirely too much for those around her, yet somehow still not enough? But in the face of Mr. Vail's fierce, unwavering conviction, those old insecurities were cast in a new light. A light that revealed so plainly how none of it mattered. Fern had been right. And now Mr. Vail was right. Even though the world was determined to convince them otherwise, Elodie was enough. And so was she. Because they were both daughters of the king, loved unconditionally, without measure, despite every single one of their mortal flaws. Ivy let her eyes flutter closed as those verses from her morning reading washed over her mind, bringing with them a renewed wave of absolute, unshakable peace.
"Elodie!"
Mr. Vail's voice suddenly rang out, the commanding tone startling her in the quiet.
"I see you growing further away from me, even though I asked you to stay near."
"Sorry, Papa," the girl called back. Hot tears beaded in Ivy's eyelashes. A soft, irrepressible smile curved her lips. "Thank you," she silently prayed, breathing out a long sigh through her nose. "Thank you for this beautiful piece." Yielding completely to the overwhelming sense of joy enveloping her, she shifted her weight and lay back against the picnic blanket. She sprawled out, her shoulders relaxing until the crown of her head was pillowed partially in the cool grass just beyond the edge of the fabric. "Thank you for this reminder, Lord, of your goodness and grace. Thank you for this day. Just thank you." A shadow suddenly fell across her face.
"What are you doing?"
Came Mr. Vail's hushed, intensely curious whisper. For once, that familiar, agonizing prickle of self-consciousness did not ghost across her skin. She didn't feel silly or out of place or scattered. She simply felt happy. "I'm praying," she quietly revealed, keeping her eyes closed as she basked in the warmth of the late spring sun breaking through the emerald canopy, the gentle breeze whispering past to caress her face. A soft rustle of fabric sounded close by, followed immediately by the subtle, shifting pull of the blanket beneath her shoulders. Curiosity winning out over her peaceful repose, Ivy cracked open one eye and peeked to her right. Her breath hitched. Mr. Vail was now lying beside her. He mirrored her posture completely, his face tilted upward toward the dappled sunlight, his eyes shut. His arms were sprawled out, resting so near that his hand was mere inches from her own. "What are you doing?" she whispered, gently tossing his earlier question right back at him. The very corner of his mouth twitched. He exhaled a long, steady breath.
"I'm praying."
Her curiosity only deepened. Though she knew it was truly none of her business, she couldn't help the soft words that slipped past her lips next. "What about?" For a split second, the warm edge of his bare, pinky finger lightly brushed against the side of her own. Ivy tensed, the phantom jolt of that touch sparking all the way up her arm. It was so impossibly soft, so fleeting, that it surely must have been an accident. A mere thoughtless settling of his weight against the blanket and nothing more.
"That,"
he softly replied, an uncharacteristic teasing note weaving through his tone,
"is between me and the Lord."
Chapter 47. And for the next 2 weeks, that became her new routine. Mornings were dedicated entirely to the Lord, anchored by her daily devotionals, quiet reflection, and prayer. Afternoons were spent tending to the ill as Gracehaven's resident herbalist, or wandering the forest with Sir Charles, foraging for fresh herbs and speculating on when Mr. Croft might return, all while she dreamt up new, engaging ideas for the children's summer ministry. Thanks to her companion notebook, Mr. Vail was always available to brainstorm with her at a moment's notice, no matter where she was or what she was doing. But she kept her evenings for her friends, quiet moments spent beside Marigold, helping the sunfae sweep up after the honey bloom closed, waiting for her to finally be ready to talk. Or lively dinners shared with Grandma Evelyn, Daphne, Felix and Bastian at either the Wisteria or Ashdown Park. And Saturdays? Once again, her Saturdays revolved around family picnics in the woods. Just her, Mr. Vail, and sweet Elodie. The loamy scent of the forest floor filled Ivy's lungs as she knelt in the dirt, carefully brushing away a layer of decaying oak leaves. Beside her, Elodie crouched low, her eyes wide with rapt attention. "Now look closely," Ivy instructed, pointing the tip of her trowel toward the honeycomb-textured cap bursting through the soil. "This is a true morel. They only appear in the spring, and they are entirely safe. Quite delicious when sautéed in butter, actually." She shifted a few inches to the right, tapping the metal edge of her trowel against a second, slightly darker mushroom. "But this one here is a false morel. See how the cap is wrinkled and lobed rather than pitted? And if we were to slice it open, the false morel would be filled with a white, cottony substance, while the true morel is completely hollow inside." Elodie leaned in, her nose wrinkling as she inspected the fungi. "And the false one is dangerous?" "Highly toxic," Ivy confirmed, letting the gravity of the lesson settle in the air between them. A few yards away, seated comfortably upon their picnic blanket, Mr. Vael remained utterly silent, a sketchbook propped against his raised knee. For the better part of an hour, the rhythmic, whisper-soft scratch of graphite against heavy parchment had served as a steady backdrop to their foraging lesson. Every so often, she caught the weight of his gaze drifting their way, studying them intently before ducking back to his page. Finally, she could bear it no longer. Rocking back on her heels, she wiped her soiled hands on her gardening apron and sweetly inquired, "What are you drawing, Mr. Vael?" The scratching paused, but his head remained lowered, his eyes stubbornly trained on his latest sketch.
That, Miss Fairwood, is between me and my sketchbook.
Elodie huffed, rocking back on her own heels. "Papa never shows anyone his sketches, Miss Ivy, not even me." Carefully turning to a fresh page, Mr. Vael idly remarked,
I do not read your diary, Elodie. Therefore you do not look at my sketchbook.
Then his gaze lifted. Across the sun-dappled expanse of the forest, his ice-blue eyes locked directly with hers. And in that moment, his cool mask melted away completely. His gaze warmed, the corners of his eyes crinkling as a true smile curved his lips. Her heart leapt against her ribs. A treacherous heat flooded Ivy's cheeks. Thoroughly flustered by her own soaring happiness at that brief glimpse of joy on the usually reserved man's visage, she swiftly lowered her gaze back to her work, forcefully breaking the connection. Tightening her grip on her trowel, her fingers trembled slightly as she turned back to her fungi lesson with Elodie. "Now then," she stammered, the words suddenly too large and clumsy for her mouth. Where were we? Ah yes, the stems. You must always remember to check the stems." Sundays soon assumed a beautiful rhythm of their own. Marigold finally emerged from her self-imposed exile, returning to their usual Sunday lunches. Bit by bit, meal by meal, the Sunfae began to smile again, her bright, joyous spirit returning to its familiar, radiant warmth. After lunch, the remainder of the afternoon was strictly reserved for the children's ministry, a time that belonged only to her and Mr. Vael. They spent those quiet hours together inside the church, poring over their Bibles to choose their absolute favourite passages for the summer memory verses. They playfully bickered over the weekly hymn selections, debating the merits of various melodies while trying to ascertain which of them was the least terrible singer, and therefore the one who would be forced to lead the children in song. For a time, everything seemed so wonderfully perfect, so rooted and secure that, for the first time in her life, Ivy simply stopped agonizing over the endless spiral of what-ifs. What if Mr. Croft truly was Fern? What if he wasn't? What if Fern ever decided to break his silence and write to her again? None of it seemed to matter anymore. Until the Saturday morning, exactly 2 weeks before Daphne and Felix's wedding, when she was jolted awake. Utter darkness filled her bedroom, the pre-dawn silence broken only by a ragged gasp. "Ivy, wake up! Look!" Marigold. Her voice was thick and trembling with tears, yet the breathless cadence carried an unmistakable note of overwhelming joy. Rubbing the exhaustion from her bleary eyes, Ivy shoved herself into a sitting position. Across the room, the hands of her wall clock, only faintly visible in the pale shafts of moonlight spilling through the lace curtains, read exactly 5 o'clock. "Marigold, what?" The words froze completely in her throat. Her best friend sat perched on the very edge of the mattress. Resting carefully within her lap was a package wrapped in brown paper and tied off with an elegant length of green silk ribbon. And resting squarely atop it, stark against the shadows, sat a crisp envelope sealed with a dollop of crimson wax. A letter from Fern. Chapter 48. Moving like a woman wading through a disorienting dream, Ivy reached out, her hands shaking as she accepted the package and the wax-sealed envelope from her best friend. The dam she had so carefully constructed over the past 2 weeks instantly shattered. The rush of what-ifs returned with a deafening roar, sending her thoughts into a dizzying, chaotic spiral. What if Fern had a perfectly valid reason for his agonizing silence? What if he wished to begin their correspondence anew? What if he was every bit as earnest and true as he had been before? What if he wished to meet and declare his affections in person? Her breath caught. Her pulse quickened. In silence, she stared down at the dark crimson wax, dreading the moment she would finally have to break that seal. But Marigold was still speaking. The words were tumbling from the Sun Fae in a desperate, breathy rush that demanded her full attention. "I have been such a fool, Ivy. Please, you must forgive me for being such a wretched friend to you these past weeks." Ivy blinked hard, forcing her eyes away from the letter and back to the woman sitting on the edge of her bed. Marigold was finally talking to her. Truly talking to her. Swallowing against the sudden dryness in her throat, she tucked her own swirling anxieties aside. Carefully setting the package and the unopened letter atop her quilt, she shifted closer and captured Marigold's hands, encasing them warmly within her own. A silver sheen of tears gathered in her best friend's eyes, catching the pale moonlight filtering through the lace curtains. A single drop spilled over her lashes, tracing a path down her cheek. "It has just been so difficult," Marigold whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Gently, she squeezed Ivy's hands. "Seeing all these wonderful, beautiful things happening in your life and wondering, why not me? Why can I not be the one swept up in a fairy tale romance by a mysterious admirer?" The Sun Fae looked down at their joined hands with a wince. And then when Mr. Croft left and the letters from Fern stopped, she trailed off, swallowing visibly, her eyes fluttering closed. Ivy remained perfectly silent, simply squeezing her friend's hands in return to let her know she was listening, to let her know she was here for her. Marigold drew in a slow breath and opened her eyes again. "But I have been working so hard to find true contentment in my own life, Ivy, to not be envious of others, to simply trust in the Lord and what he has in store for me, whatever that may be." Almost shyly, the other woman added, "You have been such an inspiration to me of late in that regard." Ivy's brow furrowed. "Me?" "Yes," Marigold softly insisted, a watery smile touching her lips. "Seeing how peaceful you have been these past weeks, how joyous, you seem so entirely comfortable in your own skin and your circumstances, and I want that too." Ivy's throat tightened. "I hardly feel inspiring," she managed on a rough whisper. "I am just doing my best, but I am so very glad that you are speaking to me again." Looking thoroughly sheepish, Marigold leaned forward and suddenly flung her arms around Ivy's shoulders. She gratefully melted into the embrace, sinking into her best friend and soaking up the deep warmth that always seemed to hum beneath the Sun Fae's skin. For a long, precious moment, they simply sat together in her moonlit bedroom, the fractured pieces of their friendship seamlessly knitting back together. "Thank you, Lord. Thank you for helping her." The gentle silence that had fallen was only broken when Marigold let out a soft, self-deprecating laugh against Ivy's shoulder. "Just look at me," her friend murmured, carefully extracting herself from that embrace. "Making this entire moment all about me. I am so sorry." "No, please, don't be—" But Marigold was already on her feet. She hastily wiped her cheeks clean with the back of her hand, her expression softening into a supportive, encouraging smile. "I will be downstairs in the kitchen if you need me," Mary promised, moving toward the bedroom door. "But I will leave you alone now to read your letter." "My letter?" Ivy's gaze darted back to the package and letter waiting for her atop her bed. Her stomach gave a sickening twist. As if sensing her unease, Marigold paused, glancing back over her shoulder with her hand resting on the doorknob. "And Ivy?" her best friend softly revealed. "I am so happy to report that Fern cannot be Mr. Croft. He is still away, you see, dealing with that Drake for the sanctuary." Chapter 49. The bruised grey of dawn began to bleed through the panes of her window, slowly chasing away the night. Yet Ivy remained standing beside her bed, her gaze fixed upon the still unopened package and letter waiting for her atop her quilt. She pulled her cashmere shawl tighter across her shoulders, her arms folding firmly over her chest. Her eyes burned, gritty from a lack of sleep. But she couldn't sleep. Not anymore. Nor did she dare step off that cliff into this new unknown. Her memories of the sweet early days of corresponding with Fern rushed in to fill her mind as she restlessly paced the length of her bedroom floor. The thrill of eagerly waiting for his next letter, of basking in his shared scripture, his surprising insights, the decadent flavours of the exquisite pastries he had baked just for her. Fern had always seemed so perfect. She turned, pacing in the other direction, her gaze snagged upon her nightstand. Resting there in the dim morning light was her companion notebook, the heavy gold of Mr. Vail's pocket watch gleaming beside it. Her chest constricted, her breath hitched. She was back in the forest with Mr. Vail and Elodie, melting in the face of the rare, devastating warmth of the elven man's smile. In the next moment, her thoughts became utterly consumed by him. His scent, his warmth, the quiet rumble of his voice. How eagerly he flung himself into their ministry work every day. How devoted he was to little Elodie. How kind and patient he was with her despite her forgetfulness and scattered thoughts. Her heart swelled. She adored every moment with him. She loved every single one of his quirks, even the elegant way he tilted his head over his sketchbook while he drew, only the Lord knew what, during their weekly Saturday outings. A shaky exhale escaped her lips. Her pacing steps stuttered to a pause. Love. She loved Caelen Vael. The realization bloomed within her chest, hot and fast, as terrifying as it was absolute, consuming all her doubts, all her what-ifs. She loved him. She wanted to be with him. Even if he never saw her as anything more than a friend or a companion for sweet Elodie, or a mere helper for the children's ministry. She loved him. And she would not sacrifice the peaceful rhythm they had found together. Not now. She could not correspond with Fern for a single moment longer. Reluctantly, her attention dragged back toward the package and letter. Dread settled in her stomach like a heavy stone. But she would still have to write him back. She would have to sit there at her desk, pen a polite final letter, and refuse his affections once and for all. The very idea made her want to crawl back into bed and feign illness for the rest of forever. Ivy closed her eyes and dragged in a slow, deep breath. She could do this. And no matter what happened, no matter how terribly awkward or painful this morning became, God loved her. And that was enough. It would always be enough for her. Bolstered by that truth, she finally stepped forward and sank onto the edge of her mattress, reaching for the package first. Her trembling fingers pulled the green silk ribbon free, letting it pool onto her lap as she peeled back the wrapping paper. Beneath lay one of Fern's usual, entirely nondescript boxes. She lifted the cardboard lid. The rich aroma of dark chocolate instantly washed over her. Nestled inside sat the very same sort of chocolate pastry he had made for her weeks ago, the one she had loved so dearly. Any lingering appetite she might have possessed instantly vanished at the sight of it. Carefully, she lifted the pastry from the box to set it aside upon her nightstand. As she did, she froze. Resting flat against the bottom of the box was something else entirely. A small, supple leather portfolio. A spark of curiosity cut through her dread. Gently pulling the portfolio free, she brushed away a stray smudge of powdered sugar from the dark leather cover, unwound the thin leather strap holding it closed, and slowly opened it. A sharp gasp ripped from her throat. The portfolio slipped from her numb fingers, tumbling onto her bed. The papers tucked within spilled freely across her quilt, catching the early morning light. Sketches. Ivy stared, her vision instantly blurring as hot tears gathered thick and fast in her eyes. Pages upon pages of graphite sketches, brought to vibrant life with gentle, sweeping washes of watercolour lay before her. Sketches of her and Elodie. With shaking hands, she reached out, retrieving the top page to truly admire the masterful artistry. The flawless lines captured her exact likeness, right down to the curve of her smile and the flyaway strands of her hair. It was an image of her kneeling in the damp earth, a trowel in her hand, caught in the exact moment of her mushroom foraging lesson, alongside the bright, attentive elven girl beside her. More tears spilled over her lashes, tracing hot, wet paths down her cheeks as she looked at the next page. And the next, barely able to see the breathtaking artwork through the deluge of her weeping. They were all sketches of her scowling, her chin lifted in stubborn defiance, her tucked beneath an umbrella, rain streaming beyond, her lounging on the Whitfields' porch with Sir Charles, sunbathing beside her, her in the pew at church, her attention rapt upon something unseen. "Caelen," she whispered, the name bursting past her lips on a gasp. She let the sketches fall from her hands. They drifted back onto the quilt like a scattering of autumn leaves. No, that couldn't be right. It simply wasn't possible. Fern had outright insulted Mr. Vael in his very first letter to her. He had called him a bird-witted man. She lunged for the wax-sealed letter. Her hands shook so violently that it took her 3 tries to crack the red wax seal. But at last, she ripped open the envelope and tugged the missive free. Her eyes darted to the top of the page. She only managed to read the first 3 words, though, before a breathless sob tore from her throat.
I love you.
Ivy clenched her eyes shut, pressing the letter flush against her chest. Desperately, she tried to calm the frantic racing of her heart. But it was no use. Her shoulders shook with her silent sobs. Her tears streamed freely down her cheeks, soaking into the collar of her nightgown. She knew this handwriting. She knew it intimately. It was the exact same elegant script that greeted her every single day upon the cream-coloured pages of her companion notebook. The exact same handwriting that had meticulously penned every single letter from Fern. It was him. It had always been him. Every letter, every gift. Drawing in a ragged breath, she scrubbed the heels of her hands over her eyes to clear her blurred vision. Slowly, with still trembling fingers, she lifted the parchment back into the pale morning light to read the rest of Caelen Vael's confession.
I love you. Most ardently. I have loved you for some time, Ivy Fairwood Flores. I just feared that you might never be able to love me in return. But these past few weeks have given me hope once more. If your feelings toward me are still what they were the night of Miss Halloway and Mr. Caldwell's engagement party, please tell me so at once. My affections and wishes remain unchanged, though I was unable to fully express them to you that night. Please allow me to express them to you now. I love you. I long to be with you. I wish to never be parted from you from this day on. And yet 1 word from you is all it will take to silence me on this subject forever. I will be waiting for you at our picnic spot. I will wait all day. I will wait years. I will wait decades. I will wait as long as I must. Yours, C.V.
Chapter 50. A thick pearlescent mist clung to the ground, swirling around her ankles as she stumbled along the lane leading out of Gracehaven. The sun broke over the horizon, the grey dawn rapidly giving way to soft, sweeping brushstrokes of lavender and gold. Before leaving the Honeybloom, she had managed to pull on her everyday dress, her trembling hands blindly tugging the laces secure before she fled out the door. She had not bothered with her stockings. She had not bothered with her boots. Barefoot, she floated through the early morning like a woman entirely untethered from reality, like a woman caught in a dream from which she hoped to never wake. The ancient, towering trees of the forest loomed in the near distance, their trunks still shrouded in the morning fog. Her gaze scoured the edge of the woods, her heart hammering out an aching rhythm. Any moment now, the illusion would surely shatter, and she would jolt awake, finding herself alone in her bedroom with only the cold moonlight for company. Yet the damp earth beneath her bare toes remained wonderfully solid. The sharp chill of the dawn continued to bite at her skin. Then a silhouette detached itself from the gloom of the trees, striding toward her. Caelen. For the first time since she had known him, his dark hair was left completely unbound, tumbling over his shoulders in thick, loose waves. He wore a simple linen nightshirt and riding breeches, his formal blue tailcoat hastily thrown over the shirt to ward off the morning chill. Step by measured step, he advanced through the drifting mist, unwavering, unrelenting. The ice-blue intensity of his gaze remained fixed entirely upon her. It was him. It was truly him. The momentum that had carried her all the way down the lane bled away. Her steps slowed, dragging to a halt upon the road. A tremble seized her limbs, echoing all the way down to her toes. A fresh surge of tears welled, sending the dawn's light blurring before her, fracturing her fern's approaching silhouette into a hazy watercolour. In the next moment, the last vestiges of her strength simply vanished. Her knees buckled, giving way beneath the sudden, crushing weight of her relief. But she did not fall. A gust of warm wind swirled around her, holding her fast. And suddenly, he was there. Strong arms wrapped around her shoulders, catching her before she could strike the ground. He dragged her flush against his chest, entirely enveloping her within his solid, anchoring warmth. Like a woman on the verge of drowning, she tangled her hands in the soft linen of his shirt, clinging to him as if he were a lifeline. Beneath her fingers, his own heartbeat thrummed, warm, steady, real.
Do not cry.
Those words brushed against the curve of her ear. Lifting one of his hands, cupping her jaw with all the care of a man handling something truly fragile, he swept the pad of his thumb across her cheek, wiping away her tears.
Please, Ivy, do not cry.
Ivy. The sound of her given name on his lips sent her heart to swelling, her soul to singing. She wanted to hear him say it again and again, not like he had uttered it within the hedge maze the night of Daphne's party, not with frustration, not with exasperation, but like this, as if he longed to savour it always, as if it were a vow all its own. Smiling, she tilted her face up to meet his. The brilliant light of the rising sun caught the loose strands of his hair, illuminating the mist behind him like a radiant halo. Gone was the carefully composed mask of the Veritas gentleman. Gone was his trademark cool detachment, his frosty indifference. This morning, his pale eyes were true windows into his soul, bearing all his secrets to her. His worry, his fear. As if even now he thought she might reject him. I'm crying because I'm so very happy, she tried to explain, though her voice trembled around the words. I had so hoped. But she soon trailed off on a breathless laugh. Had she hoped? All at once the memory of that moment from Daphne's engagement party captured her thoughts. The extraordinary sight of her Mr. Vael striding across the gallery toward her, ignoring all others, moving through the crowd with the singular purpose of claiming her first dance. As Fern had promised he would. Yes, she had hoped it was him. But what a fool she had been. She had been so eager to convince herself that a man like Caelen Vael could never be the sort of man who pined for her, who stayed up all night thinking about her, that she hadn't even allowed herself to see the truth before her very eyes. It had been Caelen who had insisted he escort her through the woods for fear she might become hurt. Caelen who had flung himself between her and Mr. Croft when he thought the gargoyle a threat. Caelen who had shielded her from the Lord Regent's notice. Caelen who had chased her out into the storm. At last, she saw it. At last, she could confess aloud. I had so wanted it to be you. His hold upon her tightened with those words. Ducking his head closer, he rested his brow against hers as a sigh escaped his lips, the sigh of a man utterly content. With the movement, his scent enveloped her yet again. That rich, intoxicating aroma of dark ink and bittersweet chocolate she had come to love so dearly. It was so perfectly him. It smelled like Caelen. It smelled like Fern. It smelled like home. Thank you, she prayed to God, her tears beading further in her eyelashes as she basked in this wonderful man's nearness, in the quiet peace of the moment. Thank you for listening to my prayers. Thank you for taking care of me. Without warning, Caelen shifted his stance, smoothly sweeping her right off her feet, as if she weighed nothing at all, as if he were a groom about to carry his bride across the threshold. For a moment, she could only stare at him in surprise until he abruptly spun her about, sending the unbound cascade of her hair streaming freely through the gold-dappled mist. Her head tumbled backward, a delighted laugh exploding from her lips. At the sound, his features softened into one of those rare, devastating smiles of his.
"I so love to hear you laugh,"
he confessed, making her heart try to wing straight from her chest again. She didn't think. She just spoke, the words spilling forth before she could second-guess them. "And I so love you." At once, he ceased twirling her about. Absolute silence descended between them, broken only by the distant waking trill of a meadowlark. Ivy hardly dared to breathe. She could only gaze up at him, swiftly losing herself within the depths of his diamond blue eyes with their startling flecks of silver, the eyes suddenly boring into hers with an undeniable intensity.
"Marry me,"
he exhaled. Not a command, but an earnest plea. "Yes," she agreed at once, yet more tears welling up to blur her vision. Happy tears, wonderfully happy tears. Another smile unfurled across his face, making him almost seem to glow within the morning light. A breathless laugh tore from his throat. Laughter. For the first time she heard true laughter ring out from her Mr. Vael, her Fern, her Caelen. He spun around again, twirling her right there in the middle of the path leading to the forest's edge.
"Lead the children's ministry with me as my wife, not my assistant."
A watery smile broke across her face. She breathed out another unhesitating, "Yes." His head ducked low once more, his lips brushing against her face in the sweetest of kisses, first against her brow, then the corner of her eye, and finally her eyelashes, tenderly kissing away the lingering salt of her tears.
"I love you,"
he finally uttered aloud, branding those 3 little words on her heart. She sighed, already longing to hear them again.
"So much so,"
he added, his tone taking on a good-humoured note,
"that I will have to now rename the shop, of course."
It took a few moments for his words to sink in through the haze of her incandescent happiness. But even when they did, she still offered him a thoroughly confused smile. "But why? Vael's Vellum is a perfectly lovely name." Adopting his usual deadpan expression, he dryly quipped,
"To account for the fact that it will now be a stationery shop and an apothecary. Naturally."
She laughed again, shaking her head at him, even as her stomach fluttered with breathless excitement for the future. A wedding, the children's ministry, a shared shop. What else might the Lord have in store for them? "What a perfectly ridiculous idea," she bantered back, already primed to tease him further. Until he tipped his head closer to hers again, completely stealing her breath away with his sudden, overwhelming nearness. For a long, suspended moment, they stood together like that, so impossibly close that she could smell the sharp, clean tang of sweet mint tinging his breath. So close that the tip of his nose brushed against hers. "Kiss me!" That was what she wanted to say, but she dared not disturb the peaceful intimacy of the moment. Cherished and loved, completely safe within her fiancé's arms. Her fiancé? Another foolish smile curved her lips. She could not wait to tell Grandma Evelyn, to tell Daphne, to tell Marigold, to tell the world. And yet, a tiny lingering question still tugged at the back of her mind. "Why Fern?" she heard herself asking, wincing as the words slipped out, entirely ruining the tender perfection of the moment. But when she peeked her eyes back open, she found him pulling away just enough to watch her, not with annoyance, but with a deeply fond, knowing smile resting upon his lips. With a smooth shift of his weight, he set into motion, effortlessly carrying her off the road and beneath the towering, familiar shadows of the trees. Above them, a woodland thrush began to sing a bright, trilling melody, greeting the dawn.
"In veritas,"
he softly explained.
"the nobility are rather taken with exotic flowers. orchids, rare tulips, so much so that they like to compare themselves to such plants. For example, the lady considered to be the most desirable debutante of the season is called the crystal rose.
Ivy rested her head against his shoulder as he spoke, lulled by the steady, rhythmic sway of his long strides and the comforting vibration of his chest against her side. A crystal rose. How she had always longed to see such a fantastical bloom, but they were so difficult to grow. Caelen hesitated for just a moment before he continued, his tone turning heavy.
After my wife passed giving birth to Elodie, after I became a bachelor once more, those gossip papers Lucian is so fond of took to calling me a frost veil orchid.
Ivy frowned, watching the dappled light of the morning sun play across the lines of his profile. Now there was a flower she had never heard of before.
It is an exceptionally rare flower that grows only in Guildenspire,
He quietly revealed, his gaze fixed on the winding path ahead.
heavily prized. The gossip mongers meant it to be a compliment, but I always wondered what it might be like to simply be seen as a fern.
Those drifting motes of silver and gold light danced around them the further they forged, catching in the loose, dark waves of his hair as he carried her deeper into the safety of the woods, toward their picnic spot.
I wanted to know what it would be like to not be considered a prize to be won, or a title to be secured, but just to be seen for who I am, a man longing for a simple, honest life, something with true, lasting meaning.
Her heart swelled with a profound tenderness for this man, a man who had simply wanted to be known as something resilient rather than a fragile hothouse flower meant to be kept behind glass, who had wanted to be a plant that flourished in the quiet shade, putting down deep, enduring roots. At last his pace slowed, coming to a halt just on the edge of their usual clearing. When his eyes next lowered to meet hers, their icy blue depths melted into a pool of absolute warmth.
And I found it here, in a town I had originally thought to be completely bereft of proper society or consequence, but found to be full of light and true Christian love.
A smile unfurled across his marble-like features.
The life I always wanted is right here in Gracehaven, with my Elodie, and with you, Ivy.
Again moving like a woman drifting through a dream, Ivy reached up, her fingertips timidly brushing against his jaw. Just as I now see that the life I always wanted is with you, Caelen, and with our Elodie. His breath hitched, his eyes fluttered closed. Leaning into the warmth of her touch, a long, shuddering exhale expanded his chest, as if the sheer weight of hearing his given name spoken from her lips was a balm soothing a wound he had carried for years. For so long, I thought that what I wanted was merely a physical space, a house and shop of my very own, she continued on a whisper, her voice breaking as another tear slipped down the curve of her cheek. But I see now that God had something much better in mind, and Her lips trembled. I do believe that you and your daughter may very well be the answer to a prayer, Caelen. Slowly, he opened his eyes. The morning light caught the bright, wet gleam of unshed tears shimmering within their diamond-blue depths.
As you are the answer to so many of mine,
He whispered back. Without another word, he gently set her back on her feet and ensured she was steady before he suddenly leaned down and captured her mouth with his at last, stealing her breath, her heart, and the very last of her doubts. Trembling all over again, Ivy melted into his embrace, into the sweetness of his kiss, as pure joy flooded her chest. This was pure bliss, being captured within the warmth of Caelen's arms, safe and adored. A sudden, soft rustle of fabric sounded from nearby. "Papa," a sleepy voice called out. "Did Miss Ivy say yes?" Ivy gasped, her eyes flying open. Heat flared in her cheeks as she twitched away from Caelen's kiss and peeked around his shoulder instead. There, sitting up on their picnic blanket, was Elodie. The little girl rubbed sleepily at her eyes, her dark hair hopelessly mussed from where she had evidently spent the early morning camped out alongside her father, waiting for the dawn. Waiting for her. Her throat burned at the realization. Caelen offered her an uncharacteristically sheepish glance before boldly wrapping his arm around her waist, anchoring her to his side. With that, he wheeled them both around to face the girl.
Good morning, sweetheart.
Elodie dropped her hands from her eyes, blinking against the rising sun. Her gaze darted between Caelen and her, then back again. The remaining sleep vanished from the girl's face in an instant. "Miss Ivy!" Elodie scrambled to her feet. "Oh, Miss Ivy, did you say yes? Papa, please tell me she said yes." The breathless hope in the little girl's voice made Ivy's heart swell until she thought it might simply burst. This sweet child had been out here in the woods, hoping and praying for this exact outcome just as fiercely as her father had. "I did!" she called back through the dawn-drenched wood, the words a near sob breaking from her swiftly tightening throat. "I said yes!" With a delighted squeal, Elodie launched herself forward, racing toward them both. Caelen gracefully dropped to one knee, easing her down with him, his arms thrown wide. Elodie crashed into them with a laugh, and then it was hard to know where one embrace ended and another began. They were no longer three individuals, but one family. Surrounded by the gold and silver light of the forest, wrapped in the strength and love of her future husband and the sweet girl she already adored, Ivy squeezed her eyes shut and held on tight. She no longer felt like a burden. She was no longer a woman adrift. At last, she was deeply rooted in her purpose, absolutely assured of her place in God's kingdom. And she was finally, wonderfully, home. The end. God bless and thank you for listening to Ink and Ivy, a cozy Christian fantasy romance, Gracehaven Book One by Ashley Willingham. Copyright 2026 by Willingham Publishing, LLC. For more clean, God-honoring fantasy romance filled with on-page prayer and the Lord's universal truths, please visit ashleywillingham.com. We hope you'll join us again for Gracehaven Book 2, Briar and Bloom, Marigold Story.